in SAS, and also the director of the Center for Cultural Analysis, which is an interdisciplinary think tank, postgraduate think tank at Rutgers, working on the relationship between the arts and humanities and the natural sciences and the social sciences. We run annual programs every year, a seminar on an interdisciplinary topic of interest. This year's seminar is Arts and Aesthetics. The seminar meets bi-weekly. It's open to anyone who'd like to attend, so if you're interested in the problem of arts and aesthetics, which we think about historically as well as with reference to contemporary art, you should join us. We meet on Wednesdays from 1:10 to 4:10 in the afternoon in the brand new academic building on 15 Seminary Place. So you can see our website. We have a brand new website, and there's information about the seminar there. It's a fascinating conversation. And we are, along with the generous co-sponsorship of Mason Gross, very, very pleased to welcome you to tonight's event as our co-sponsors. I'm going to introduce the event and our two conversationalists, I guess we'll call them. They're speakers as well as conversationalists. Kara Walker, of course, who needs no introduction to our audience tonight. We are at Rutgers University, where she is the Tepper Chair in Visual Arts at Mason Gross. It seems fitting to me to begin with her own education. She holds a BFA from the Atlantic College of Art and an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. Soon after graduate school, she made an immediate impact with work that featured black and white silhouetted figures dressed in costumes drawn in racial stereotype, displaying a graphic history of American slavery, race, and plantation culture, and iconic scenes of violence, sexuality, and caricature. All of you will recognize this work. An immediate signature, it remains one of the most powerful styles in contemporary American visual art, and it remains constantly provocative and constantly consequential. I was thinking as I was writing my introduction, I think it would be difficult to think of an artist about whom we can say that she makes work that will always remain new, and always remain uncomfortable, and always remain relevant. Many others have recognized these qualities in Kara Walker. For she is the recipient of many awards, most notably the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Achievement Award, and the United States Artist Eileen Harris Norton Fellowship. In 2012, she was elected a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her work can be found in museums and public collections throughout the United States and Europe, including the Guggenheim Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Tate Gallery. Her major survey exhibition, Kara Walker, My Compliment, My Enemy, My Oppressor, My Love, was organized by the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis in 2007 and traveled to Paris, to New York, to Los Angeles, and to Fort Worth. She has had recent solo exhibitions at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Camden Arts Center in London, and the Metropolitan Arts Center in Belfast. During the spring of 2014, she exhibited her first large-scale public project, an installation at the former Domino Sugar Factory in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the work, entitled A Subtlety, or The Marvelous Sugar Baby, an homage to the unpaid and overworked artisans who have refined our sweet tastes from the cane fields to the kitchens of the New World on the occasion of the demolition of the Domino Sugar Refining Plant. Commissioned and presented by Creative Time, the installation was seen by over 130,000 visitors over the course of 9 weekends and received the 2015 Brendan Gill Prize, presented by the Municipal Art Society of New York for, quote, a work of art that embodies the spirit of New York City. A solo exhibition of her work, entitled The Ecstasy of St. Kara, is currently on view at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Evie Shockley is Associate Professor of English at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, my colleague, where she teaches courses on a wide range of topics concerning African American and African diasporic literature, especially poetry, in the 20th and the 21st centuries, including courses on Black aesthetics and Black power, on the Black arts movement, on the African American long poem, on African American speculative fiction, on Black women writers, and Blackness in visual culture. She received her BA from Northwestern University and a PhD in English from Duke University, as well as a JD from the University of Michigan Law School. Professor Shockley is the author of Renegade Poetics, Black Aesthetics, and Formal Innovation in African American Poetry, as well as several collections of poetry, most recently The New Black, winner of the 2012 Hurston Wright Legacy Award in Poetry, and Semi-Automatic, forthcoming from Wesleyan University Press in 2017. Her poems and her essays have appeared internationally in such journals and anthologies as the Boston Review, Boundary 2, American Periodicals, Poetry, the Best American Poetry of 2015, Best American Experimental Writing of 2015, Callaloo, and many, many others. Her honors include the 2015 Stephen Henderson Award for Outstanding Accomplishment in Poetry and the 2012 Holmes National Poetry Prize. And her work has been supported by fellowships from the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and the American Council of Learned Societies, as well as residencies from Hedgebrook, the MacDowell Colony, and the Millay Colony for the Arts. Among other projects, she is currently writing a scholarly book on graphic subjects, slavery, colorblindness, and contemporary Black aesthetics, a set of topics with obvious relevance to Kara Walker's work. So please join me in a warm welcome for Kara Walker and Evie Shockley this evening.
Hello.
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 So, here we go.
Okay.
We are both of the South. You less so than me.
A little less so.
You passed
Halfway.
through,
I passed through.
but in ways that you've talked about as being formative in your work, and certainly in terms of the subject matter
Right.
that you treat.
Right. And just in my life, I guess, which is sort of where work out it grows from.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to maybe start with the exhibit. Is it currently up in London, or this was just a few months ago?
Oh, last year.
Go to
last
Hell.
November at the Victoria Miro.
Absolutely.
Go to Hell or Atlanta.
Go to Hell or Atlanta.
Whichever comes first.
I love the title, and that's something we'll come back to. But I really love the way that you use the full title of the photo of Stone Mountain to just reframe this this iconic image that people in Georgia will all recognize for, as a symbol of white supremacy, right? The full title of this photograph, "The Stone Mountain Dr. Martin Luther King referred to in his famous I Have a Dream speech of 1963.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. Could you maybe talk about titles and what brought you back to the South for your work?
Yeah, the South, it's funny. I had this show opportunity in London for maybe 2.5 years, and became very anxious about London itself as a kind of iconic space I know nothing about somehow, but has this kind of like weight in Western history. And then I had my own baggage going into the show as an artist, an American artist, and and a few things happened. This is kind of, in a way, it's not so much the rule of my process, such as it is, but it is sort of the thing that keeps happening. Yeah. And a tragedy occurred. I tried to put it out of my mind and then couldn't. And so I was thinking about the shooting in Charleston of last year, of the 9 black parishioners by a white youth with white supremacist leanings, and thinking about how that brought into play an ongoing discussion about not guns, but racist iconography, the Confederate flag by extension, and how that became sort of present in the national dialogue, I guess, around race. And it's not that that hasn't been there. I feel like it just pops up every few years, every decade or so. There's a kind of Confederate flag issue. And that's not to sound jaded, although maybe it sounds a little bit jaded, but
It's easy to get jaded.
it got a little bit jaded. And so I started thinking about Confederate memorials and Confederate iconography and thinking about Stone Mountain. And I mentioned to a friend, I grew up in the shadow, well, not in a literal shadow, but pretty close down the road from Stone Mountain, which is this, amazing geological feature that has a carving dedicated to the, the creators and, defenders of the Confederacy. And it's an entertainment site, it's a carnival, it's a park, it's a place to go see laser show in the summer, it's a place people go jogging, it's like a regular kind of feature, and also a memorial to the Confederacy with films, with reenactors and the flags of the Confederate States, and it has all this loaded history. And also, I was telling my friend and realizing almost for the first time, also it's a relief carving with figures in profile. And I thought, I wonder if this has been the influencer of my work, all along. And I'm just now seeing it as, sort of looking at it, both as, as the object that it is and the history that it contains, but also as an artwork made by a series of people, which I got into as I started investigating, the work. And it seems like a good time for me to kind of, maybe not skewer, but like just go a little bit deeper into this Atlanta and this South and this place that my parents still call home. My brother still, they're a few miles south of Stone Mountain in Lithonia, but it's all in the area, and just sort of take a look at the southernness. And I felt also that I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about a piece of mine being excised from a show at the High Museum, and I was like, they will take my work. They will. And I will do it by having a show in London, and they will think it's very exotic, because they will have the same reaction that I'm having to London, where it is like away and it's official and they have cute accents, and then they will take this work and they will see that it's important.
Oh, I love that, because London does have that effect on Americans.
Yeah, we're just like, oh, the Queen. Yeah.
The Queen.
like with no history, attached to that. Like Disneyland or something. We're just like, oh, princesses.
I have nieces, so
Yeah.
this is a little bit of a detour, but I wanted to ask you about the international reception of your work. We're used to, and I think about this with my own poetry that is very grounded in a certain set of icons and coded language that was created to sort of perpetuate racism and to slip under and around it. But it's not clear to me as a writer how that travels and translates to people who don't know all the codes. What about?
I wonder about it too. I have, go a few slides further. I'm sorry, I didn't think I was going to get into that, but it's not relevant, this piece. My thought for a while was that I would I felt a little bit like I was a blues performer, and I have, this kind of language, and I would go and I would sing the song, and then that's good enough.
Yeah.
But it really varies from place to place.
Okay.
Countries that have a legacy with the transatlantic slave trade, with slavery, with race or racism, they have maybe, exhibiting in Brazil is different than exhibiting in Germany,
Right.
but exhibiting in Germany, there's histories of tyranny and oppression, and also histories of silhouette cutting. So,
There it is.
of Scherenschnitte. But it's always, I think with my work, across the board, my work has been kind of about misinterpretation, sort of, misinterpreting the bodies of others and misinterpreting the meanings of color, and then also my own failed readings of texts that may be completely racist. My like thrill of reading Gone with the Wind, like as a young person and being like, oh, so good, you know, you're just like, and then you're like, oh, you know, it's really a complicated, funny, like kind of grotesque, kind of like, again, like you laugh and then you're kind of like, why am I doing this, you know, because I initially went into it thinking, you know, I was just, you know, the first time I picked up the book, I was just like underlining things, you know, and just kind of like, just using it, like not a book, but like as an icon or some kind of, you know, object to be destroyed. And then I really, I said, no, you know, I'm going to actually read this like as it was intended, like as a novel, and treat it as such and see what happens then. And
it's interesting.
It is an interesting book and an interesting movie and an interesting phenomenon, pop cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
You see why it became the pop culture phenomenon that it is.
Exactly. I'm, you know, just sort of glad to hear another Black woman say something like that out loud.
Well, there's also, I mean, there are these really grotesque moments in it too. There's
Absolutely.
like completely like bald-faced kind of descriptions that are, it's too easy to say racist. You're just kind of like, what does that even mean?
Right.
You know, how is that you know, how is it that a reader is meant to understand a Black body through this description? And so it's interesting as a, you know, a reader with a Black body to sort of see. And I was already interested in romantic novels and romantic texts, like where the, you know, the heroine is situated and what's the sort of manipulation factor between like the author's intent and the reader's experience and the heroine's like, you know, position within all of that.
Well, I mean, the way you're talking about it, I mean, I read it too young probably and was caught up in identifying with Scarlett. I didn't know better. I know better now. But that the way that you can get drawn into a text, even when parts of it are disturbing, feels like it has a very close parallel to the experience of entering, for example, the round room of slavery. We get drawn in and we find ourselves being appealed to, our senses being appealed to, and other things being appealed to, perhaps.
I think that was important to me early on. Well, early on is like in graduate school, which is when I was reading Gone with the Wind, and I'm really kind of thinking about. I think there's. Well, I was talking with a writer friend of mine who, you know, was talking about empathy, and you know that the experience that a reader has with a book or with, you know, characters in a novel is one of empathy, and so. I think to bear all in a way, even, you know, there's sort of the worst aspects of your thinking, and ask in the nicest way possible for a viewer or a reader to just go with me here, please. But without having to give a reason or, you know, without having to, you know, give a warning or say, you know, you're going to be scolded in the end or something. Like I think that was important for me, and kind of it felt, I don't know now, but it felt very radical at the time in grad school to sort of to do that and to also say, oh, and there's race and history and gender happening at the same time. You know, like, by the way, we're all going to be in my space.
I like that. I like that. I mean, part of what I also think about when I think about the kind of slippery work, in a good way, that your silhouettes do, is they give us such precision in the outlines, but we have to imagine, you know, the expressions or the details. It's both precise and really fuzzy.
Extremely imprecise. This is the slavery piece you were talking about. You know,
there's a way that the clarity is in tension with a kind of protection from some of the horrors. We don't have to see them.
It's very much about the blinders. Actually, it's kind of like. I mean, I think you know, there were a bunch of different concerns that kind of coalesced into this form. So, you know, doing the cutouts now looks or feels or seems maybe a little bit obvious, or like, you know, like, of course, you know, that, but, well, maybe not, but for me, but at the time, you know, I was coming at it from, you know, like, almost competing interests. One was like, I am an artist and I make paintings, but painting isn't working for me because, you know, painting, somehow by painting the way I wanted to paint, or the way I thought painting was valid, was somehow reifying a kind of patriarchal, like, value system that didn't include me in it. And then there was another part of me that was trying to understand my own experiences and sort of, you know, sort of this identity politic moment where I was feeling like on the edge of feeling very critical about it, and also wondering why I was so critical about it and what was I avoiding.
Right.
And I think those two interests sort of came together in a way where I thought, well, I can't make paintings about this because of X, and I can't just like completely undermine identity politics because I don't know what my identity is, and we have to like unveil something, you know, that somehow through the materials and through this process of you know, it was like it was about unveiling and veiling, and so
At the same time.
and it did sort of, through all these steps and a lot of tears and a lot of, you know, agonizing, kind of emerge as a form that really made sense because of its withholding. You know, it's like, and also because it's just a line basically that's cut out, and then it becomes a form. So there's a formal thing, and then there's
we're going to come back to the form, I'm sure. I wanted to maybe think about that veiling, unveiling, precision and sort of protection in relation to the social moment that we're in, because I feel like I was thinking about some of the ways that friends of mine have talked about the events that sort of sparked the Black Lives Matter movement in Charleston, other forms of violence that are clearly racialized. And we all know that these are things that have been going on for a long time, but there's something about having to look at it on video, being unable to escape something about the brutality of it.
Right.
That seems particular to this moment. I don't know if you want to think about your work in relation to the social scene at all, or does that resonate for you?
It does, but I don't know. Where did I go when you asked that question?
Well, I mean, maybe here's a better segue, because I can't help thinking about the moment that we're in. There's a moment in the film that you made, An Audience, which was a kind of way of, people have said, spying on your audience for a subtlety.
Right.
In the film, which just sort of captures the audience experiencing what I believe is just the last day of the exhibition, there's a moment that really just grabbed me. A young African American or black man, upon being invited to touch the sculpture, says, I can't do it. You know, I can't feel her. But then, as everybody else is like, step right up. He finally puts his hand out, he reaches out and ultimately ends up leaning his whole body, even the side of his face, against the sculpture. And he says, I feel safe.
Yeah.
Now, there's a cynical way we could read that, and we could have the conversation about the mammy figure, right? And I'm happy to have you talk about that, but it resonates with me, for me, with the repetition of I don't feel safe.
Right. I think that, you know, that that feeling of feeling safe is like that's the overriding. When you asked me the question, I went to my safe space immediately, and that is a highly protected space that has been impinged upon enough, and I'm just like, and I think that the hard part about having the safe space inside is that it can become the blinders again if you're not careful. But I think that there's something, my the cohort, my memorial group, we have these kind of roving conversations about memory and objects and histories, and one of the things that keeps coming up is like the art of forgetting, right? Like
Right.
that is sort of the built-in problem of memorials, and also quite possibly the built-in function of our bearing witness to something so often, to a set of atrocities, and having even the power and the capability to bear witness with our phones and with the internet and it's I don't have an answer. I just know that that's a feeling that I have, is that there's an overload. I mean, I have a text piece that had something on the title about race fatigue, and and I think that the unfortunate aspect, there's something even on the radio. If I listen to the news on the radio mostly, and try to not consume images too much, but there are movies and things I like. But there are moments sometimes on the radio, for instance, when they say a white police officer and a black man, and then I always think, well, is there a moment when that person becomes a man? Can the man who was killed be an innocent victim and not the iconic black man? There's a Susan Laurie Parks. Well, there's a lot of Susan Laurie Parks, but I don't know, and this is probably the wrong one that I'm thinking of, but there's a repetition of, the top dog, underdog, and one of the brothers goes and plays Abraham Lincoln and is assassinated every night, and there's something about this bizarre kind of repetition of, I don't want the black man to become like Florida Man, the Twitter feed, where it's just kind of like an idea of something that is a problem, that is problematized, or a victim that is sort of perpetual and loses individuality and loses an individual history and an individual form, and that's the thing that I guess winds up propelling other works, or trying to think about other ways of making work that maybe aren't about this kind of distancing technique of cutting silhouettes or.
It's so hard to kind of find your place as an artist in relation to work that in relation to issues that feel overwhelming, and the things that you've already set out for yourself as goals, right?
And it's interesting. I was speaking with someone today on about, or there was a sign in the blackboard in the classroom talking about politics and art, and we were just sort of musing about. There's an uncontrollability about it. You can try and make work sometimes that responds to the issues of the day, but you don't always know that work will be work.
Right.
You don't always know that work will sort of survive its time.
Absolutely.
Or come back around and be, included in the canon or in the narrative that we want to tell ourselves about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is work that made no overt attempt to be political, and then somehow or another it seems completely of its moment, completely relevant to, and I mentioned like these land artists in the early 70s who actually seemed to kind of like embody something like white flight, like they sort of left the cities and they went on this kind of like vision quest for, sort of ultimate sort of gestures or something. And that's a reading that you can sort of give to that work now, even if it was outside of the intent, or misreading perhaps of the artist's intent.
Intentional misreading is good. Let's see if I can find the place where I had this. Too many sheets of paper. you said something I wanted to come back to, and I lost the thread. So I'm going to shift.
Find another thread.
Well, I know what the thread was. It was that aspect of misreading. It reminds me of a conversation that we were having in my class. We looked at your work in my graduate class this semester, which is on slavery and the African American imagination, and we spent a good bit of time with a subtlety, and in the process of kind of trying to get our heads around your sort of commissioning the film and audience as a way of anticipating some of the, let's say, bad behavior of the audience that came through. We were trying to get our heads around the sort of dissemination of Instagram photos and things elsewhere that seems still not to be able to be controlled. Or
Can't be
you
controlled.
can't control it, right? Do you worry about losing control of the meaning of your work? I mean,
I lost control of the meaning of the work the minute I started making the work, I think. I think that I probably should worry about it more, but I think that there's something really, subtlety was a sort of like very up close and personal example of what can happen with my work in other contexts, which is that you have a broad, diverse audience coming to a piece that's really stemming from my body, my Black imagination, and my, thoughts that are historical and researched, and little tendrils that are just almost unnecessary, but part of it, part of the movement, part of the body, part of myself, and then when I was working on that piece, I really thought that one of the important aspects of it is that it's public. It's not just a gallery show where it can kind of like control something. So it's public, and public means messy, and public means misunderstood, and public means heads butting and ideas clashing, and it also there's something very kind of beautiful about it. I made that piece because, I made that piece for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that was clear to me was that it was a piece for New York, and it had to be kind of embracing that cacophonous, like, messy spirit. And the internet is not New York.
Right.
But again, I think even one's experience of, Instagram or Facebook is very limited. Like you have a kind of a radius that you can expand, and you can go there, or you can just sign off. And I think it was, it was interesting. There were people misbehaving, or I don't know, behaving, I guess, with the work.
Sure.
As soon as, and I've said this, before, because I've noticed it before. But if you put a tourist in Rome with a naked satyr anywhere, everything gets touched and posed, and especially with digital cameras, people just fondle. If you look at bronze sculptures in open areas, look at the parts that have been polished the most, in even at, works that I'm not crazy about, at like the Time Warner Center, there's those two Botero sculptures, and there's the little penis, and the people just rub that little penis raw. And it is just like, it's crazy, and I don't know, I can't, do the science on it, if you want to analyze, what's the human impulse to poke and prod at inanimate objects. But what's interesting is, so people are treating this mammy figure to this familiar level of disrespect, or a level of respect that a mammy would have enjoyed, perhaps, or not enjoyed in reality, nipples suckled on. And then there's a counter movement to reclaim the figure as iconic and representative of Black suffering, or blackness,
Mm.
and that in a way is limiting.
Yeah.
And when those groups come together, then you have the public and public art.
Yeah.
When an audience was filmed, I have like 80 hours of footage because there was also a week of demolition that got filmed that
Okay.
is hard to watch. But it was about 10 hours, I guess, because of it's 6 cameras and in the last moments of that show. And it was fascinating to see, you can't really construct a clear narrative of what people are seeing, but people are having these kind of, it's a big experience. I can't say it's reverential, but it's a big experience.
Yeah.
Church women came in their white outfits and made this pilgrimage out there and were shocked to see the back end. And, I mean, I don't know, I just love that kind of thing. I could watch it all day.
Oh, the piece is so generative. I have at least 12 more questions I could ask about it. One thing I want to ask is, you talk about it in relation to the mammy figure, right? And the icon is clearly there. Just a curiosity question, why did you name it Sugar Baby instead of Sugar Mama?
Well, I don't know. There's these guys.
Yeah.
Were
you thinking about it consciously?
I not exactly. I mean, I don't know. It just sounded good, Sugar Baby.
It does.
And people all call it the Sugar Mama, but I think that when I hit upon the idea after sort of ramming my head against the wall for a while, like how am I going to tackle this space, and somehow it just worked.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
know. One of the other questions I wanted to ask about that piece leads maybe into process a little bit. I'm very, as a poet, you're in your room, you're at your desk with the notebook or the computer. It's all solitude, unless you really go out of your way to try to collaborate. And I think I want to go out of my way to try to collaborate more, but this was like the ultimate collaboration. Did you feel like you had to get the crews with the cranes and the equipment and all that? Did you feel like you had to pull them into your vision, or just was it business?
They were there. This was, I mean, that was what was unique about this project, and the first sort of public work, I think, yes, that I've done. I have to make sure. Can you hold it on that slide for a minute? So Creative Time commissioned the piece, and they said something that people don't say often, which is, we support you.
Yeah.
Like, whatever your vision is, we are there for it. So for 6 months, I came up with a bunch of crap. Like, I mean, like really just, I wasn't thinking of them as, they were fixed ideas, they were sort of generative process. And so they were sort of there, if you need research, So I would say, okay, I want to, it was a big performance space. And, I don't even know anymore. Like I was in there, I had ideas, and I just started sort of spewing. And I don't know if it's like this with you, like it's just like, there's a lot of garbage at the front of your brain, and then the meat is, you have to do a lot of work to dig it out.
Yeah.
And they just hung in there. They didn't say no. They didn't say, how's that going to work? I had ideas that were like violations of the Environmental Protection Act, and they were like researching it, for me. And there was like, this is what it's going to take, or this is what it will, this is, how much this and that costs, it would have to be shipped from here and there. And it was just like, and so it was generative as like, just like writing an idea on a piece of paper and throwing it away, and somebody saying, just like bring the eggs,
Yeah.
And after several months of, kind of back and forth. It was different than like a graduate school kind of critique situation. It wasn't where somebody said, well, I think you should think about, X or Y. It was really like, yeah, okay, cool. And then I would go to my student and I was like, are you sure? Oh my God, they're crazy. No, that's wrong. And really kind of go back into the, but there was a long period of time when the thing wasn't the thing. The thing was kind of like taking shape as a series of ideas that embraced, sugar, molasses first, molasses as a byproducts of industry, Black people as the producers of the byproduct of industry, Black people as the machines that produced the byproduct and the product. And then sort of the iconography of molasses, the iconography of sugar, the idea of refining. I was thinking about, then I started investigating more on the history of refined sugar, like a 1,000-year history of refined sugar in the world and then in the West, and then as this kind of quest for, kind of superiority in the sort of agribusiness world. And it's direct correlation between the rise of the transatlantic slave trade and then industry and other industries and their byproducts and the byproducts of sugar on our bodies and rum and fat and obesity and I sort of went like down this sort of long train of thinking that sort of kind of ended in ruin, right? There was like sugar refinery explosions in Savannah that resulted, there was a molasses tank explosion in 1919 in Boston that killed like 35 people, like who knew, like there was just like this ongoing like history of sugar. And Sidney Mintz, who recently passed, wrote the book on sugar, he told me that there is a byproduct of molasses. It's a 3 steps removed from molasses, or 2 steps removed from molasses. That was the ingredient in the killing gas in the gas chambers in Auschwitz. So when he told me that, I was like, and he gave me all the papers on it, and it was very intense. I was just like, this is just this killer crop somehow.
Wow.
I don't remember what your question was, but that was my answer.
It's a beautiful
So why the
answer.
mammy figure?
And collaboration.
And the collaboration part was really about yes. And when I finally said, I want to build a heroic figure to this catastrophe, because I thought everything it was like down this rabbit hole that was all about you are all screwed, like look what we have done from time immemorial, like we've never been good, like stop fooling yourselves. And I was like, well, that's not a piece that I would want to go and visit, I mean, it's in there, but it actually it's
Sugar coated.
It's sugar coated, literally.
And it's sublime,
And it's gone.
And it's gone. And that was hard, it sounds like.
It was certainly challenging. I think as soon as, I've done things with puppets, and as soon as you start putting faces on things, they become alive in a way that's not cool. It's not, you can't have sort of critical distance. And so I would visit the subtlety in the dark, after hours, and just feel like I'm in the presence of something, and then wonder about my relationship to it. Is it outside of me? Is it inside of me? Is it, how, is it does it have consciousness? Like that kind of thing. And you're like, I know what it's made of.
The Sphinx is made of something, but it also holds that power.
So
it's interesting to think about ruin and decay in relation to the sort of longevity of the Sphinx. But let me ask you about, I want to ask you some practical questions, but I also have a kind of an academic question to ask. And maybe I'll start up here and then we can come down. I mean, do you think, as a working artist, about aesthetics as a term that people have written about for centuries and theorized in various ways, or does a term like practical aesthetics, thinking about how artists talk with each other about what we're doing, resonate more with you? Do you and your colleagues, whoever you associate with, think about aesthetics and debate that?
I don't.
That's a fine answer.
Okay, no, I think about aesthetics as soon as I start making a piece and I think, oh, this is compositionally wrong, and I'm already halfway into it, and it's, stuck,
Do you scrap it, or do you push
It's
through?
a little bit more like the improv mode. Like I started with the structure and then something has gone awry, and that is, necessary, because it could be no other way.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you,
But I think formally I don't know that certainly the term aesthetics doesn't come up when I'm sort of talking about work, and maybe it should.
I
but-
don't think so. I don't think there's a should. I'm thinking back to the debate that you had with yourself as a young artist, sort of with painting.
Right.
The equivalent, probably, if I was to make a quick parallel, would be, to write a sonnet or to not write a sonnet.
Right.
This is,
Right.
and it's about how these particular forms or genres get racialized and
Right.
sexual and gendered and
Gendered. Sexualized
as well, probably. And
Yeah. Well, I suppose in a way I do. I just hadn't sort of formalized it, because there's something that's happening in my studio right now, or without me. It's not doing anything, but it's happening in my studio this week. That is an aesthetic decision that is sort of kind of, I think, based on our political moment or political reality, or impending political reality. And I don't know exactly where it's going formally image-wise. There's a few things there, but it was almost like a throwback, like an intentional throwback to a set of sort of formal processes, but I guess intentional. We'll see where it goes. It's too soon to say, but it involves all of the stuff of, the cutout work, but also, actually, what I'm not saying and saying at the same time is that I thought, so we're going backwards, we're going back in time, so I guess I'll go back in time too.
Right, right. I mean, and so much of your...
Well, I've been back in time, so that's the
yeah.
joke about it, I guess. It's like,
I mean, it's a way, and obsolescence, ruin,
yeah.
retrogression.
Yeah.
Might as well mirror the world that we are living
To some
in
extent,
to some degree.
we'll see what it turns into. It's been
Yeah.
I just got to finish the piece. No offense, I'm not trying to be evasive, but it's taboo to talk about the piece before it's done. So.
Understood, understood. Let me ask you a little bit about maybe how you plan ahead, or whether you plan ahead. You've worked in silhouette, you work in painting and drawing, you work in text, and that's something I'd love to talk with you about. You work in puppets and film. I remember reading about one of your exhibits, the Rise Up, You Mighty race. In one of the interviews, you talked about that being maybe the first installation of a series of investigations that related to, I think, racist texts from our history.
One specific racist text from not too long ago. Yeah.
Okay, so do you plan series, and do you move between and among the genres intentionally, or?
Well, intention.
Yeah.
I have this image of myself being very orderly in my system. Like I did devise a kind of system for myself early on, which included text, or at least writing, reading, writing, drawing, something else, something real, like a final work or something like that, which is a little bit of a, formal, like ABC kind of language, which doesn't always work for for me, I guess. And but it does help when I get into a muddle, when I start thinking that everything has to be a big piece or a finalized result, or when I feel like I'm responding too much to the needs of others outside of my studio space or outside of my, self. So, but it does help to anchor my projects in a way in the thought or concern. And the thought or concern might not necessarily comport directly with the thoughts or concerns of the moment, and I think, in fact, it has been very bad for me to have like stacks of newspapers in the studio, because it doesn't make for the art that I want to make. It makes for the art that I feel I'm supposed to be making. And so I've had to, kind of like, they're there, but they're in the office, and I can check in with reality as needed, but it's been pretty fruitful to sort of bounce around. I know in my gut if I feel like I should be making a film. I got into a jag for the last couple of years of making these large graphite drawings, and I sort of realized that maybe I can set those aside, because I keep thinking of them as sketches, or that they're somehow provisional even though they're very large, and I'm not sort of following them up somehow with the thing that they're supposed to allude to. So they're like, so I'm looking at them and saying, oh, okay, well, it's half finished, but it's gone, so I won't worry about it. And so it's like a forgetting process. So I'm trying to it's like if my studio had like 8 sides and I could just turn a platform and say, okay, we've been looking northwest for too long on the graphite, so we're going to go over here east and really look at what we've been ignoring over here, which might be a shadow puppet film, it might be a performance art piece, which there won't be too many more of those. And
Okay, I won't ask why.
well, you can, but
why?
It's exhausting. I've only done sort of 1, 2, 3, I guess. One was, I don't mention. The second one wasn't really mine. It was just sort of an intervention that I didn't really plan on doing in somebody else's piece that was problematic. And then the third one was all mine, which I was very proud of, but I will never watch the video for it. It was with Jason and Alicia Moran at the Whitney Biennial a couple of years ago, 2011, 12, I think.
I've seen a clip of it. It's amazing.
And I sang, I did a reading, like a piece that I wrote, and then I sang Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones. Or I yelled Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones. I basically just lost my voice doing Brown Sugar.
That kind of, collaborating with Moran is just the thing to do.
It was very cathartic, very, very wonderful.
This is a question, I told you I was going to skip around a lot, and I'm doing that. This is a question that that speaks from my upbringing in the South in one way, and my being here at Rutgers now. So much of the work that you're known for is in black and white. That's the dichotomy, right? But of course, and while I grew up in a very black and white environment, that's how it felt in Nashville when I was young. We have and certainly do live in a very multiracial, multi-ethnic nation, as you know. So I know there's one of your works, which is also a what I think of as a visual poem from Do You Like Cream in Your Coffee and Chocolate in Your Milk? I'll read the line that I really love. You do this very hyperbolic, ironic sort of line about blacks and whites as being, quote, surrounded by a hostile sea of foreigners who do not understand that our particular impasse is a large, infallible, monstrous, is large, infallible, monstrous, and immortal, right?
Yeah.
Just let us have our like mannequin,
Yeah, black and white thing.
right?
Yeah.
But how do you think about non-black, non-white viewers of your work, and do you go beyond this particular poem in thinking about thinking outside that dualism?
Well, I think in a way by letting, by actually adhering to that. It's just our thing. It's a black and white thing.
You wouldn't understand.
You wouldn't understand. No, it's funny to me because my, you know, my experience of my blackness really kind of occurred with the move to Georgia. And prior to moving to Georgia in California, my friends were multi-ethnic, sort of middle of, you know, agricultural city, a city in the middle of an agricultural world in Stockton, California. And so I think I have an automatic kind of, you know, I don't know if it's sensitivity, but a kind of like reticence to say anything that's outside of my sphere of understanding, but that is inclusive of those who have found themselves to be other or have experienced it as a white world in which they are alienated or alien. And so I see parity there. You know, I see parity there when, you know, basically my experience of Georgia on day one was I brought my yearbook from 8th grade, and some of my new black friends were looking at it and they're like, what are all these people? Basically, and I was like, well, you know, Mexican, like Chicano, like, is that a thing? Chicano, you know, like Filipino, she's Filipino, she's from Vietnam, you know, she's Chinese, you know, like everybody was sort of like, she's mixed, you know, and it was funny because it was like it does not compute, and just in that particular school, in that particular, you know, in Decatur, Georgia, it was very clear that if you weren't black or you were white, then there was sort of you just like had to join, I think.
You had to join. There was one
Side. Or
Indonesian.
be very, very unique.
Right, yeah. An Indonesian family moved into our school while I was young, and it was like, is she going to be black or is she going to be white?
That was the question?
Yeah, that was the question I'm sure she was not having that question.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah.
But that was the question the rest of us were having.
Well, I think comes back to safety, like where, you know, if you're sort of thrust into a what do you want to call that, like some paradigm that's set, you know, what's your safe space, you know, is it, you know, like what are the options and can you subvert those options and, you know, find your own sort of way.
And then some of us try to do that.
Often means just leaving, but like I'm out of here. But that's a good question though.
It's important. And you know, I think that it's a very complete world that you are responding to, and I was just curious about how much you thought about that. Since we're back in the South, let me ask this question about the sort of the landscape of the South. There's a Lucille Clifton poem that I always think about, where she talks about trying to write about nature and finding that every time she starts it, she ends up writing an other poem, an other, right? A tree poem becomes a poem about lynching, right? Ocean poem becomes a poem about the Middle Passage, right? Do you, maybe not do you, but how does your experience of the Southern landscape or other landscapes as racialized come into your thinking? And if you want to talk about maybe that in relation to your memory project?
Well, Well, landscape. So my first sort of introduction to the Georgia landscape beyond Stone Mountain was just the sort of absence of sidewalks in the neighborhood where I was living and the presence of gullies with liquid or creeks and trees and kudzu. So there was this kind of weird, wild quality. So Georgia felt, this is in the city, or in the sort of outskirts of Atlanta and Decatur and Stone Mountain. It often felt like it was trying to be a suburb but failing at it, and sort of shouldn't say that. I'm so down on Georgia. I don't really mean it that cruelly, but sort of. Like there's a house and there's a lawn, but then there's this like forest in front of it, and so one memory that always kind of comes up for me, and like I mentioned it enough times, is like being sent home from school on a couple of occasions, and then sort of walking along this road where it's just like this kudzu gulch, and this is 3 years out from the 2-3 years from the Atlanta child murders, where bodies are just sort of being strewn about in these places, and that's kind of like one of the qualities of Atlanta that I sort of cast as part of the blame of the killings, is that people could go missing in a way, or you got the feeling anyway as a 13-year-old that you could sort of just go missing. And there was this darkness, and there was always roadkill and something putrid sort of around. So that was my initial experience of the landscape, is there's too many trees, too much kudzu.
Yeah.
But you were talking about nature and the environment, and I've kind of been, I can't really complete the thought, but I've been thinking about it just because I've been, my years in California are sort of live for me as like this rosebud that I return to over and over again. And I have a good friend who lives, who's from Stockton and lives not too far away, and we catch up quite a bit. And we went camping twice, to Yosemite. Like, that was my child love. I wrote letters to my parents begging them to take me to Yosemite. Like, I must go to Yosemite. We went there when I was 2, and we went there when I was 10, and I went there when I was 44, 45. And yeah, so that's and what it is about Yosemite, besides it being a national park, is it's majestic. It's not just nature. It's like everything. It's like these glaciers and it's sort of, there's a dream that's beyond an American dream. It's a dream that it's a place that you can walk into and find some part of yourself. And so so I started reading a few books about people in nature, and I got kind of interested in I was reading Into the Wild by John Krakauer, and that book Wild, that I didn't finish, by Cheryl Strayed, and something else, and I started thinking, and I was reading them right around the time that the verdict for Ferguson was coming in, and people were tearing things up, and riot police were out, and I was kind of caught in this space of thinking about what has this relationship to nature, to ownership of the land? What is, how has that bypassed Black people, and how come Black bodies become consigned in reality and in language and in speech to the city, to the inner city? And how is it that this, several generations from being organic farmers of the land, we've become denizens of the inner city. Right. And so anyway, it's sort of like an unwritten essay in my head about reclaiming the land, or reclaiming the soil. How is it that I know so many people who can't stand to go into nature, or feel, people from the city who've grown up in the city go into a quiet place and feel like, okay, it's too quiet, I don't know what's around the corner, I don't know where I am, and this cannot be. And and I mean, there's a historical legacy for that. We were, you know, mass exodus out of nature and off of the land because of racism and because of domestic terrorism, and because it was impossible to make one's way.
So you go back.
So
you go back.
So you go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I realize I don't have a watch, a clock.
Oh, yeah, we could just go on.
We could just go on.
Chatting.
I have maybe 2 or 3 like one-off questions, a little open-ended questions. Where do you seek your joy? Is it in your work, or is the joy in the finished product, quote unquote?
Oof. That's a very hard question, because I always found joy in making stuff, you know. I mean, drawing, I made little cartoons, and I mean, and then there is something in the doing that is completely ecstatic and hard to sort of quantify, because it lives in this other space. But getting to it doesn't make me happy. And maybe that's just the case for artists everywhere, but and especially because I have kind of shifted my process so much, so it's not just like I'm going to read this book and then think about this stuff and then write some stuff to figure out what my own thoughts are. It's kind of like, you know, oh, I've got a show in 2 years, you know, and I'm done, I can't do it, you know, and you know, like everything starts to become like an impediment, and then things keep happening in the world, and that's an impediment, and then I feel like I've, you know, made this piece before, and that's an impediment, so everything starts to become like a struggle to sort of get to the you know, the first mark, So when I was talking about you know, working in my studio right now, sort of going backwards in time, I did something that felt less renegade, let's say, because there's this renegade moment out in our sort of political universe in America and in lots of parts of the world, and I was just like, okay, I'm going to clear the space. Right. I'm gonna like own the space, and I'm not gonna curtail, like it's not gonna be like a size that I can embrace. It's going to be wider than my own wingspan, but it's also going to be more permanent maybe than the silhouette pieces. I mean, they have a permanence, but it's kind of like through all the rigmarole of like the gallery creating permanence for me. Right. Whereas when I started doing the cutouts and putting them on the wall, it was kind of about their impermanence and their fragility, and you know, the fact that they could just sort of take it off and say, okay, that's over, show's over, you know, no more pleasure here. But this is something that's kind of about like an opposite. It's opposite of Twitter.
Yes, we need a little
I
of
just
that
like,
space.
I want to actually like prime this area.
Yes, clear.
You know? And it doesn't mean that what happens in that space isn't, you know, a little bit beyond my control. It isn't fueled by my own anger, but it's like, I can't just have my anger just be like bursts that, you know, don't go anywhere. Right. It has to be something that lasts.
How do you use humor in your work?
I don't use humor, I just am funny. That's the problem. I'm like trying to be serious. My initial, I mean, I did want to be a cartoonist when I was very, 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 very small. Right. But like, you know, Peanuts, you know, like, I was a very big Charles Schulz fan. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think that is, if it's not there, then I kind of get a little suspicious. I mean, I think that some of the work from this last show in Cleveland, these drawings are not all that funny, but, you know, a little existential query, a little spiritual cry in the dark.
The title has its humor.
Well, yes, The Ecstasy of St. Cara. It was also because I was running out of monikers to call myself. I had elevated my position from my first show as a negress of noteworthy talent, like increasingly escalating my titles to include, honorary PhDs, Dr. Professor Walker, and on, and
Saint.
So Saint, why not? I mean, I think there's a very sort of not depressive, but a little bit of an introspective essay that I wrote for the catalog for St. Cara that's about martyrdom and Black Lives Matter and holy relics and the idea of what does one do, and does it make sense to carry the bodies of the dead forever? Does that get the point across? So yeah.
Well, I think I will give myself one last question, and then maybe, I don't know where we go, where we are in time, but open it up for
We'll open it up to the
Q&A.
audience.
So I cannot resist asking you about writing, and as a poet, I find your titles to deal in the kind of poetry that I like and write, and I'm always struck by how much you refer to writing as part of your process, and you always call it writing or sometimes typing.
Typing.
But then you've
Haven't
got
been typing so much.
watercolor writing and pencil writing and writing that's meant to be looked at.
Yeah.
What is writing for you? Is it part of visual art? Is it poetry? Is it its own thing?
I don't know if I guess it's kind of its own thing. I mean, I call it typing because I was using a typewriter for the most part, and I didn't want to presume to be a writer. I have a great deal of respect for the poets of the world, and for just suffering for us. For piecing language together in a way that, again, it's about that sort of empathetic kind of response that's a little, it's not dependent on a protagonist, but like honoring the sort of the sound sometimes and the meaning of a word. And so I have to do that sometimes because I don't always trust images. Or I say I don't trust images, I don't trust my own hand sometimes with images. It's like, it's kind of second nature in a way to like have a sketchbook, and then, I sort of like, I don't do a drawing that I really honor in the sketchbook. And so there's something about like wanting to like really hold on to the moment without sort of doing a flippant kind of like doodle that doesn't go anywhere. So to write it down or to just let it be words is sometimes okay. I started writing as a kind of part of my practice when I really, really didn't talk at all. And there was a period in my life when I really kind of shut down, and I must have said some words, but I don't recall conversations, or I remember listening a lot. I mean, very, very shy, and so I had my mother's IBM Selectrix typewriter, which became my sort of agent of just knowing that I even had words to say, figuring out how to articulate thoughts. And so that's kind of important, is to remember to try and articulate my thoughts, because I do such a good job of pushing them off to the side so I can retain my happy place or my safe space. So sometimes I just have to, open the door, get out the, use words.
Dear hypocritical twerp.
Yes. I like your the letters in your book.
The farewell letters.
I don't have it with me, but now, what are they called?
Farewell letters.
The farewell letters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now I'm speechless.
There you
so
go.
Somebody else should
Turning
talk.
it all around. I'm just unhappy carrying your dead image on the wall.
It's amazing. I'm so sad that I've missed seeing all of this, but you all got to see it, and this is the moment for you to raise or maybe even wave your hand a little. And
I think there might be
is there a
microphones
mic?
coming around too.
There's a mic back in the corner. Maybe you can
Yeah.
go to it.
I think
Or two
there's
mics
two
on
mics on
either
either side.
Yeah, we can bring the mics to the audience members.
Okay.
I know
But if
you have
there's
questions.
no questions, then we'll all be. No questions? We answered everything? Okay.
Sure.
Oh.
Hi. Oh,
Hello.
Jesus.
Yes.
So I guess this is for both of you. I was wondering, just based on like being African American women and both artists in your own right, what do you think about people who, when they view your work or read your work, get an emotional reaction from it and then like feel, I don't know, I don't want to say like validity, but almost like the right to that you're wrong, or that if your work makes them feel afraid, then they're in danger, or like if you're like talking or writing about gang culture, then you're perpetuating the notion yourself and being a hypocrite. So, and if they feel you're being a hypocrite, then you must be a hypocrite. Like I just want maybe weigh in on how you deal with like people's feelings about your work and questions of validity against your own art and what that brings up.
People are entitled to feel whatever they feel looking at art and to misinterpret things. I think that for me, when things took a turn early on, or maybe not a turn, but I got so much praise early on for doing something. I wasn't entirely sure if that was what I was doing. And then so much flack or actually calls for censorship and some flat out calls for, you weren't raised right. I think when I started doing this work, I kind of imagined that what art does is it causes people to not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily change minds, but it changes thought patterns, and people respond, react according to their own sort of notions of what's right or what's wrong or what's sayable or what's not. And that I always anticipate that people can and should be encouraged to, sort of respond in kind, even if what that response is hostile to my intent or maybe hostile to my intent, but I take issue with people being hostile to me personally because I think that, what I'm doing with my work is still, in the end, an inanimate, even an animated puppet is still an artifice. It's still fiction. It still lives in this space that's relatively safe for us to, enter into and not be injured physically. Like having ideas is not really an injury to a psyche. Not necessarily. Sometimes it can be.
Depends.
Depends.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, I still hate when I find out that someone has like dramatically misinterpreted my work, but I don't find that out often. I think that's not actually something that I confront. I tend to hear from people who want to affirm what they're reading, and sometimes I hear about other kinds of discussions. I remember hearing someone come over and tell me after a reading, they're over there talking about whether you're an angry Black poet or not. I was like, of course I'm angry. But I'm not, going to hurt them.
I'm not angry at you, I'm just angry.
Not mad at them. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
There was a question here.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I wanted to ask more about this idea of permanence and the impermanence of the sugar baby and the idea of it being the subtlety and a table centerpiece. It is so vivid in my mind and all of my senses because the smell of it and the heat of it, it's, when I look at the poster on my wall, I can go back to all of that. And so I wanted to ask about all of the senses involved with that and your intentions there. And also whether you've worked with stone or sculpture or wood or even plaster when you're talking about permanence.
Yeah, I have been wrestling with sculpture for a little while, and so I'm not quite there yet with permanence. I have a piece that's in production that doesn't exactly look like my work, but it came out of kind of a funny situation where I happened to be in a friend's sculpture studio, and he gave me a whole bunch of materials to work with, and so I did, and it took. It helped me realize some interesting things about working in sculpture that you don't necessarily get when you're sort of working 2D or when you're working collaboratively with a team like Creative Time, that it's just you and this thing. And sculptors know this, but, especially if you work with clay or making a clay model or something that's going to be cast, it is gut-wrenching. And everything comes forward, or things that you didn't expect to come forward. If you have a sort of physical relationship with the thing in front of you, like a one-to-one, eyes, hands, arms, The element about the senses at Domino, a lot of that was the building doing the work for me. That the site itself was just pregnant with, information, and it kind of, in a way, dictated something about what would have to be in there, because it reeked of, molasses. It really was a pungent, olfactory experience, and it was sticky, and I think the idea that all of this effort for 100-something years went into producing this building and this sugar product, this refined sugar product, all that for this, for this sort of, it's like this bit of waste. Yeah, I was very kind of taken with the building as a kind of entity in itself, that had seen so much. Yeah. Thank you.
There's a question down here.
Thanks. This question is for both of you. It goes back to Professor Shockley's question about process. And hearing talk about impediments and trying to, get back to your safe space. I was wondering if either of you could talk about how you get beyond those impediments and what sort of things you might need to be in place for your work to flow.
What do you do?
I go to form often. So for me it was to sonnet. I write in forms and I create forms, and I break them and manipulate them, and once I have a constraint, it often you know, as the saying goes, it feels very liberating
Yeah.
and lets some things come in or come out that if I were just, I'm so upset, you
Yes.
know, there's nowhere to go with that as a poet. There's a lot of places to go with that as a person. But if I'm going to actually try to make some art, then form is where I go
Right.
to open things up.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's like limits somehow are kind of the weird kind of, you know, situation I always put in front of myself. It's like, okay, so I'm making work that's ostensibly about freedom, but I can't do it if I don't like sort of actively sort of restrain what it is I am going to do, or, you know, put parameters. And so I, you know, from time to time, this year I was working on a print in order to sort of keep myself from sort of falling into the trap I set of like, I can just make these drawings till the end of time, you know, like I could just make draw.
That's okay.
It's okay, but you know, there was something that I felt was lacking, and so working on it's a series of etchings, but you know, they're large for etchings, which means that they're cumbersome for the master printer that I'm working with. But so there's some kind of like boundary pushing within the restraints, the constraints of the form. But yeah, I think, like you said about, you know, it's good in life, you know, to say those things, but to be clear that actually what we're doing today is we are making an artwork, or what we're doing today is, you know, we are thinking about, you know, like with dominoes, okay, so it's not going to be everything. Like let's come back to the form, let's come back to the space. You know, like I've got all those ideas I mentioned and more sort of flowing in me, but what about it is going to fit in this cavernous, you know, 30,000 square foot warehouse?
You make it manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Manageability. Any more? Okay.
I can't see
Oh
up
yeah,
there,
you're
sorry.
invisible.
Hi, this question's for Kara. This mic is really loud.
Yeah, I hear you.
So the question was, I was looking at two of your, I don't know if they're both very recent or they were recently sold. One piece was Ourselves to Blame, which was pretty intriguing to me. I just wanted to know like what you were trying to convey with that piece, because
What piece is that?
Ourselves to Blame. It pretty much, if I would explain it,
I don't remember that piece.
it's a drawing of a boy, and it seems like a pretty young girl. She has like a pump, and she's pumping up like a boy's penis, pretty much. And I mean,
That doesn't sound like my work.
That's not your work.
That doesn't sound like it. Sounds like a influenced by.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I looked it up on Twitter, and it was like, it's a Kara Walker art page. It was like pages dedicated to all your work.
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, so there was another piece. It was called The Rich Soil Down There. Is that?
The rich soil down there, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I wanted to know like what you were trying to convey with that piece.
I don't know. I don't have an image of it either. That started out as a piece at, that was in the 1999-2000 Carnegie International in Pittsburgh, and at the time there were minifigures in a like a kind of an atrium, a kind of like Beaux Arts atrium with sort of faux Greco-Roman sculptures, and I had painted the walls gray and had some figures sort of in these panels. Like, anyway, it's a different piece than The Rich Soil Down There, except that some of the elements from the piece, which was called the Emancipation Approximation, went into The Rich Soil Down There. So there are several figures there were a lot of birds in the original piece, and I don't think there are so many birds in the other one. It's a continuation, I guess, of a kind of exorcising of sort of racialized I want to say like comedies, but it's not really comedies, you know, sort of the
Farce?
The farce, yes. Well, I mean, and the title is kind of a joke anyway, the rich soil down there. And so there are sort of obvious images of like some potentially like shoed and stilettoed feet being shat upon by a little bird, by a little crow with a hat on, like completely covered. But I don't know that what I'm trying to convey in the piece is something I can really articulate right now, because I don't know what I was thinking about when I reconstituted those figures from the Emancipation Approximation into this other piece, which was on view, I think, when the MoMA moved, when they were renovating or something, and they moved out to Queens. And it's not that it's so long ago, but it's just a piece that I really didn't think that much about. I know it's not fair. I'm sure I thought about it at the time, but I haven't thought about it since.
You have a large body of work.
Huh?
You have a
It's a large body of work, yeah. I mean, I think just to say that it's kind of a parade of these kind of farcical characters, but with an eye towards these sort of, say, Africanized figures getting the upper hand, or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hi, Karen. So, having this is just a very simple question. After the experience of Domino, and many of us here saw that, and we'll never forget it. But I also saw your work at Skidmore in 2002. It was gone, and the whole.
Oh, right.
Right. So that was a restaging of the Drawing Center show, right? So. You know, one can make a connection between the movement of the figures on the wall and the fact that people began moving with the figures in this very strange way after a while. But still, it felt very choreographed by you, by the work, as opposed to Domino, where it was, you know, a pretty delightful chaos most of the time and lots of strange things happening, sticky feet, smells, the whole thing. Now that you've gotten your taste of that free-for-all of public art, does it feel good to go back into a gallery? Do you want to stay out? Do you want to go back and forth?
Back and forth, if I could have my, you know, my druthers. You know, public art is usually sort of bound to fail, and so that's kind of like the big anomaly of the Creative Time project, was that it worked on a lot of levels, I think. It worked for me personally. I felt very much like I had, you know, been given the opportunity to realize something that wouldn't have happened without, you know, just the right mix of people, the right time and place, and the right sort of level of investment by people who didn't, you know what it was I was going to make. And that doesn't happen very often. It gave me a taste for doing big things that I've sort of backtracked from a little bit, but not necessarily permanently. I did sets and costumes for an opera at the La Fenice Opera House in Venice during the Venice Biennale last year. Seems like a long time ago. And that was almost, it was tricky, and I'm happy that I did it, but it was tricky in that way that I had assumed that everyone would say, okay, wonderful, anything you want to do. And then in the end, you know, there are more constraints, let's say, when we're talking about constraints, there are more constraints in my working creatively in a situation like that than were healthy. But there was a lot of quick learning on my feet. You know, I guess when I think about working in the gallery, I don't produce work. And I think about, I am making work for a show, then I also don't produce work. When I stop thinking about working for a gallery show or having to produce work, then the work comes and it flows. It's a crazy impediment to be sort of blessed with opportunity. You know, to be able to look down the road and say, you know, I know what's coming.
Yeah.
You know, there's something to be said for a little bit of mystery. Yeah, I don't say, I won't say I'll never do it again for sure, but I do kind of like having my rhythm in my autonomy in the studio with occasional forays, you know, out into some other realm. Like there's all these other realms that I'm curious about, but I don't, like I did the performance with Jason Moran, I did this, you know, public artwork, I did the opera, you know, none of them is exactly.
Video.
I did a music video, that's
I saw
right.
That. That's great.
Yeah, on the cheap, but we did a music video.
Puppets. Look at it. What's it called? Banshee?
Banshee, yeah, by Santi Gold.
Yeah.
Is that
Thank
it?
you
We're
all.
going to end on the Santi Gold note?
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for making the Thank you. All right.
I get nervous as soon as there's nothing to do. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah,
let's go.
sorry. I was like,
No,
oh.
you're fine.